Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Russell Carpenter ASC, the director of photography for Avatar: The Way of Water. Today's episode is sponsored by Sony Venice. The Sony Venice has been used in more than 400 high-end feature films and productions across the world. For more information on the Sony Venice, visit sonyscine.com. So I'm here with Russell Carpenter ASC, the director of photography for Avatar: Way of Water. Russell, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We were saying before we started rolling that your press right now is probably just as long as the film took to make. It's just like
Easily.
It's endless press for you.
No idea that I guess the footprint of this film is everywhere. And usually, as a cinematographer, you do a few things, but it seems like I'm busy every day. So
why do you say you had no idea? I mean, you must have known this was going to be the blockbuster that it is already and becoming even more so as the weekends go on.
Well, yeah, besides dreading it on one level, no, but I actually am enjoying it. Let's just say, yeah, it's a lot. And you can't look at anything. You can't go on Instagram or Facebook or this or that without seeing a huge social media imprint. So I get that.
And people seem to be overwhelmingly loving the film, enjoying the film. Like it's almost every headline I'm seeing is like, Cameron does it again. Like no one kind of believed that it could be another, everyone thought it was going to be a huge success, obviously, but it has the heart, it has the passion, it has everything that a great movie needs. And then on top of that, it has like the most incredible visuals ever. It's like, it really is the whole package, and to do it twice with the same franchise is just incredible.
Yeah. What I'm really enjoying, I read the credits and go, oh, that's nice. It looks like that's, and then you read a credit and go, oh, well, those people had a problem with it. And another critic. What I'm really loving is I'm going on the sites just have audience members' reactions.
Yep.
And that is such a joy to read. It's just great that people are just absolutely jazzed about it. And when do I go again? And that's lovely.
What bothers you with critics and stuff like that? Like, is there something that you read a review of and you're like, what are you talking about? Like, this is Avatar. Like, do you ever get those feelings when you're reading critiques?
The same thing happened with Titanic, I think. I mean, even before the film came out. I mean, I don't know if you remember back then, but there were kind of like, let's say this is 1996, 1997. You start to see things in the paper, and it's like it's the death watch. Basically because here's this movie that is just going over budget in big ways, in huge ways, and it's also running late in huge ways. And I felt like these people all think that we just go to the edge of the ocean and we throw gold bullion into the ocean every day. And that's not what was happening. I mean, it was people were making a very earnest effort to make the best movie they could, except, hey, there were problems. Things that we thought were going to work didn't work. And we go, we have to come back here 2 weeks later and shoot this again. And then you start to get into working with the crews of, and especially stunt people and background extras. You're talking 3 different languages. You're talking Spanish, English, and especially with the stunt people, Hungarian. That takes a long time, And also, I don't think anybody knew just how difficult it is. I mean, we knew it would be difficult. We didn't know it would be this difficult to work in water, and it just goes slow as molasses. So, okay, that's a different picture, but that's the kind of thing. But you feel there is a sense that somebody in the media is waiting in the wings for Jim's pictures to take a dive,
Mm-hmm.
And you feel not as bad as Titanic, but every once in a while you feel something like I'll read a review and it just says, that's weird. It's more than a review. It feels like a vendetta, or somebody's got a grudge. And then I read other reviews and they have negative things in them, but I go, okay, I can see that point of view. It's just that one that just kind of comes out of left field that I don't understand.
Plus, it's always just like the bad stuff. Like, I mean, at a much smaller level, but even my own work and even in this podcast, it's like the negative reviews are the ones that stick with you. And you're like, what? Why do I allow that to stick with me when I know that the majority of people are enjoying it? So, but I'm not here to talk about negative reviews. I'm talking about the positives here, because it really is just a phenomenal film. I mean, I was talking to, but before we started rolling, I was talking to your Disney rep, and it's like, I am not a long movie fan. I'm really not. Yeah. And to stick with this movie for 3 hours plus and kind of feel like I could have even watched a little bit more is saying a lot, because that is not my style for sure.
Yeah, I don't know how Jim does it, but what he does do is he creates, I think, just by watching him and working with him, everything he's doing is to keep this experience of this film as immersive an experience as possible. And I watched him work, in the virtual world, he works his cameras too, even after the performance has been captured. In the virtual world, he can go back to that scene and he can work on staging it any way he wants, or he can't change the performance. But I think people say, well, it's Jim Cameron. He's a visionary. He's a genius. But what he is he will just work these scenes over and over and over again. And he will dig in and not let go until he has something that really shines, that really is a gift to the viewer in the way it's presented. And I think that's, and for some reason, it's not like, hey, this is going to take a long time. I'm going to figure out a simpler way. No, plan A is always more difficult than plan B is much more difficult than plan A was. But he gets what he needs, and I think that sense that at heart he's very sincere in his quest to give so anybody who walks in and pays whatever they have to pay for a movie ticket now, a really good experience. And that seems like his bottom line. Now,
at the beginning of Avatar: Way of Water, we go back to Pandora. And it's a place that we've seen before, but largely what is new about this and where all of the audience questions, quite frankly, came from is about the underwater scenes and just the water scenes in general. People are blown away by this, and for good reason. I mean, this is the first time motion capture has been done underwater. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like you kind of had to create an entirely new way of filming. And I'd like to start there in the underwater capture scenes.
Okay.
A question specifically from Right 96D, and I love this question. Please explain everything you can about the underwater mocap system.
Well, okay. I think that underwater mocap system was the way that actually at the beginning, nobody really wanted to go that way because they knew how difficult it would be. And they said, well, let's do some tests where we look at what we capture underwater, and then let's put everybody on wires, and we'll have all this control, and we can do this and that. And this wasn't even close. It was like motion capture and performance capture underwater were definitely the way to go. Now, to make that happen, Jim, and this was long before I got it, he designed a tank, a huge water tank that took up a whole stage. It was indoor. It was like 45 feet wide, 85 feet long, and at least 30 feet deep. And he decided that not only was he going to have scenes where people are just swimming around, but this tank was powered by 1,000 horsepower mighty turbine pump. And so now he can do anything. If he wants to portray somebody being pulled along on the fin of a Tulkun, he can create a real speed in that water that supports that look. He could it had, it kind of had an elevator in the bottom. So when he sent that to the bottom, now you had a lot of water to swim around on. Then he would bring it up so he could recreate shallow waters or people could stand on it. And it was a kind of a Swiss Army knife of tanks, but it took a long time to build that. It also had windows all the way around. So not only could the virtual camera, underwater camera catch what was doing on, but then he has all these reference cameras shooting through these windows because, he has his main virtual camera, but he has all these other angles that an editor can use. And then later on, they can become part of this virtual world. So there's a lot going on in that tank. The one kind of miserable thing at first was that, we had to pump enough light, or they had to pump enough light into the top of the tank, so you'd have like, okay, this looks like sunlight here, and this is all good. The problem is that when light hits water, and the water is moving, all these refractive things happen. And what Jim calls caustics it's like the things you see in your swimming pool. I mean, there's light bouncing all over the place, and it was just causing havoc with our underwater motion capture and performance capture cameras. So what they did, and the only word I can come up with is ping pong ball, and they called them something else, but I can't remember. I mean, this was a few years back now. They covered the surface in about 4 inches of these ping pong balls. The ping pong balls, being white, basically all this light hit them, and they just totally softened all that light out. So the genius of that is that the problem goes away for capturing motion. But then if anybody has any reason, then they need to head for the surface, they just poke their head up through the ping pong ballatorium that we had in there. And
I love that concept too, because I saw that picture of, the cast kind of poking their head out of the ping pong ball world there. And I was wondering what that was for. I was assuming those were sensors. I didn't realize those were being used as a big diffusion.
It was just a useful thing to help us smooth things out. You need to imagine, and it holds true for the underwater stuff, is that every performance in the film is a real performance. It's that they don't just go create, okay, we'll just, they have the capability to kind of create a CGI human being, but that's not how it happened. He wanted real performances from everyone, and then not only were the actors down there performing, and you've heard all the stories about all that, how Kate's incredible ability to to hold her breath 7 or so minutes, that kind of thing. But they were even having members of the troupe, and the troupe. This is a core group of people that Jim works with, and he works with them over the years. They're basically people who can do mime work, they can do stunt work. They're very good at exactly simulating the movements of the actors when they have to be, and then after we had done story, there was lots of research done on how whales move. Some of them became whales. And they would just kind of move, because now you can make anything out of this movement as long as you have a real motion. And so they stood in for some underwater creatures too.
Why were you unable to capture motion with the mocap system underwater previous to this? What was the problem with water that just didn't allow you to capture that data?
Because a lot of that happened before me. I don't. Well, I think it was the first time it was done. I don't know if anybody had any reason to do it in the past. So basically, it had to be invented,
And we've all heard the stories of how cast and crew needed to hold their breath. But was that also like what was the reason why you couldn't go down there with scuba gear? Was there no way of having any sort of oxygen tanks down there?
Well, the only people down there with scuba gear were safety divers. And any time an actor went down into the tank, there was, not where you saw them, but there were at least 1 or 2 safety divers there to make sure that nothing happened. But one reason, but they were back a little bit. One reason you don't want to send somebody with scuba gear down is now you have all the bubbles that are releasing out of the breather. And that's a pain in the butt, and it gets in the way. So that's my imagining about, and I think they wanted the people to go down and not encumbered by that. And also it's probably a better silhouette, a person silhouette rather than a person with scuba tanks on the back for the motion capture. So that's my guess.
I want to talk about the camera package that you used for Avatar: Way of Water. I'm hearing it was 180 pounds, this 3D Sony Venice that you were using.
Well, actually, my story is that it was nowhere near that.
Okay.
After Avatar 1, which was actually, filmed with cameras that had a very small chip compared to what happened with technology after that. It was 2/3 of an inch long. Jim needed to, we were going to film this with, basically it's 4K Super 35. It's about, I don't know, it's not full frame wide, but it's about 25 millimeters wide. And depending on whether you're framing for a Super 35 or for IMAX, it's 10 millimeters high, and the IMAX is 14 millimeters high. So here we have an issue. Jim's thing was, okay, we know the cameras are going to be, and the lens package is going to be bigger. I want everything to weigh less than it did on Avatar 1. And so that started a process of a lot of R&D and invention by, basically a fellow named Patrick Campbell, who had worked with Jim before. But he's really a genius inventor, and he basically worked on all these crazy ways to just, one, let's get the weight of the basic rig down. That was done. And then because of Jim's longstanding relationship with Sony, which did basically their cameras did the first one, he said, I want a camera with tremendous dynamic range, tremendous color depth, and I want it to split in two because I don't want the whole camera on the rig. So what they did was the only thing that was actually on the rig was our lens system plus a sensor block. So you basically that's it. Then the rest of the information flows through a cable to the part of the camera that is normally there at the back of the camera, to all the processing that's inside the camera. That goes, what eventually became about a 20-foot long cable to basically a little package. I mean, not the heavy part is carried by a person, usually a grip on their back, because a lot of times the two rigs that we did that had to be lightweight, the Steadicam and the handheld rig, they're on the move. So we can't just have them tethered to a table or something like that. The other kind of exciting part, well, two things with the camera, as long as we're getting into geekery here.
Yeah, well, geek away. We're ready for it.
Geeking away. So everything was done to get this down to as light a weight as we could. But the problem was now we have this bigger sensor. We wanted to work with a 4K sensor, and we didn't need to work with a full frame sensor. Also, that would require a very big lens. But he wanted to work with zooms, so we weren't changing lenses all the time. So we did a lot of testing and a lot of research, and we eventually wound up with these prosumer lenses made by Fujinon. They are each one is 2.2 pounds. They're about 8 inches long, which is ideal for being on a rig. They track incredibly well together, which of course is exactly what you need. When you have two separate images, left eye and right eye, that have to line up. And the amazing thing about these lenses when we tested them was, even though they weren't as fast as top of the say the Fuji line lenses at their wide open aperture of 2.9, they were super, super sharp. And at first I thought, well, we did something wrong. Let's do another test, because they were just as sharp as lenses that cost 10 times more. And these are things that, I mean, let's see, I think they cost $4,000. That's nothing to sneeze at, but it's nothing, like.
Do you remember what they were? I know it was a while ago.
I didn't even mention them. That's the lenses were Fujinon makes them as a prosumer lens. They're the MK system. They're two lenses.
That's what I'm looking at right now.
The MK 18 to 55, which 90% of the movie was shot on, because we also had a longer MK lens, which was the 50 to 135. But in the world of 3D, you get a much more of a sense of depth if you're shooting in the wider, focal lengths.
And I'll put a link to this in the show notes. I mean, first of all, the fact that I've shot with the same lens you guys did for small little productions in Boston, like, that's ridiculous. But that's amazing that this just worked for you.
It totally worked for us. And I every time I think of it, I kind of get a smile on my face that who knew that these were the lenses we were these prosumer lenses. Now, we did a few things like, we took them into the secret shop and made them so you could remotely change focal length and aperture and stuff like that. But basically that was it. We had to quality test them by, I don't know, it wasn't thrashing the lenses, but making sure they held up over, the wear and tear was, they were going to fall apart in the first week, basically, is what we were after.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So my question is, I know that you had shot the first one on Venice. So was there even any other question? Like, was this just going to be Sony Venice regardless? Like, that was the camera for this film right off the bat?
Well, it turned, I came in, and the template for shooting on Venice was there. Now, as a cinematographer, you walk into this thing and say, well, I think I want to test this myself.
Yeah.
And I did the test. And yes, it has a tremendous, I don't know. That camera actually came out in 2017, the late 2017. It's kind of like light years away now that it's the end of 2022. Things change so fast. So, I'm sure other camera makers answered that. But that, the real game changer, and I didn't quite see it coming when I started testing, was this camera had two ISOs, a base of 500, and then it had a 2500 base, which is, ridiculously high. And, I didn't really have any high hopes for that, but we started to test it. And I looked at it next to the other one, and I thought, God, there's something about the characters of this 2500 base that I really like. And we tested it again. And then of course I needed to show this to Jim, and he liked it too. Now there's one big hurdle to get over, is that you're not going to get as clean a picture as you will at ISO 500. And there may be more noise and artifacts in it. But I thought, there aren't much. This is really clean for this ridiculously high ISO. So the big ask is to go to Weta and say,
and that's your visual effects company.
Yes, yeah. Yep. They are fantastic. Just the Planet of the Apes series is amazing, and they've been working. Well, I'm going to digress a little bit. They had been doing so much in the time between the first Avatar and the second, and we can get to it, but on all fronts. But one of the most amazing ones for me is what they knew about recreating the movements of a face, the human face, which would transpose or morph into a Na'vi face. Yeah. But there was much more detail, much more emotion, and in this version, you are really seeing the performance that the actors made. So that was great. But they did some testing and they say, well, yeah, we'd like the other one, but we think we can make this work. So, okay, so this is where it becomes a game changer for us, because my chief lighting technician and we were working at the way Jim, we were looking at the way Jim was working, and on his volume for capturing his cameras and stuff. It was amazing. He had a bank of computers, 3 aisles deep, and he could say, okay, well, move this waterfall over here. This tree should be a little smaller. And, you just look over and whoop, whoop, whoop. And then and this Navi, well, we can't see his feet. So let's move him into the ground a little bit. Nobody's going to know. And our framing will be better. We won't have to be so low to see, if we've got a human in the frame, but we'll still get the same effect. So Len, my chief lighting technician, and I are looking and say, wow, he's got a way of working that is very, very fluid. And we know we're going to be facing a lot of different challenges, because we could be shooting one thing one day, and the stage could be huge, and then we're on another stage the next day, and we're shooting a completely different type of scene. So we said, okay. So Len said, well, let's just, instead of the regular lights that you might have in this situation, let's just use movie lights. Now, they don't put out what, the bigger lights will put out. But the advantage is they can be incredibly precise. You can change them to be any color. And if you're going down one path and you realize this isn't working, you don't have to send people into the perms to do that and wait on them.
How do you mean? Explain the distinctions. Are you saying movie lights versus what? What was the alternative?
Oh, okay. Well, what I should say, moving lights. These are lights that are usually associated with, say, rock and roll shows.
Yeah.
Or the types of lights you would see on American Idol. And so that's what we started to surround the set with, and we tested it. And so now, given this tremendously fast ISO that Sony provided us with, we could work with those lights. And of course, we had, in our little Swiss Army knife of lights, package of lights, we were, a lot of it was these movie lights set up. We knew what the scene was going to be, and we didn't entirely blanket the ceiling of the studio. It's not 150 lights, but it's a lot of lights, enough to do the scene and make changes. So and then we have a lighting board operator who's pretty genius, and it made moving and making changes much faster. What Fiore, who did an excellent job, great job on the first one, but his technology was stuff. You wanted to change the color of the light. Somebody had to walk over and change a gel on the light.
Yeah.
Take some time. Then the light has to be aimed and fit, and that takes some time. This was pretty instantaneous. And so what we found out, especially in the jungles, is that we could use them as hard light, as backlight, if say spiders running through the jungle, and you're wanting to hit the same spots that the virtual lighting is. There's basically where what we're doing is a lot of blue screen. We may have the topography of the scene in the virtual world. So if spider needs to run down a ditch, jump up, run over a little hill, hit, all that's there. And maybe in that blue screen environment, of course, there are some plants, fronds, that he can run by and hit, and and that's all merged in with this virtual forest, which just isn't there. So what we have to do is create this environment with our lighting. So that was great. If we needed some beautiful soft side light, we would take these lights and we would hit them into basically a big white car, a 12 by 20 frame of white material. And then if that light needed to be, instead of feeling just like daylight, we wanted to feel a little green, like it had come through a canopy, we could instantly make that kind of change. So that was a major game changer.
Well, I have a question, because if you're working at that high of an ISO, Are you stopping down a lot? Are you just minimizing how much light you have? Like how are you
we're
working with
basically
that?
we're basically a lot of the time we were still shooting wide open just to make our movie lights perform like they were, huge beams of sunlight.
Yeah.
So they would come through and they'd actually not just expose to the what you call, okay, that's correct exposure. They would expose 3 to 4 times hotter. So when somebody runs through those lights, they kind of explode in the light.
Yeah.
And that was the effect that we wanted. So now, again, I didn't say it before, but when you're working in 3D, the mirror system that you're working with is going to steal almost a stop of light. So all right, you've lost a stop.
Yeah.
And then our base frames per second rate was 48 frames.
Yeah. So that
second.
cuts some of it down too.
Already you're in the hole 2 stops. Then this high ISO more than made up for that. So that's why we went that way.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no! So it's amazing. So then you would walk on to our set, and you would think in a lot of situations, like, why is it so dark in here? Why are they shooting 3D? I shot 3D back in 1995 with Jim. Our 3D unit was about the size of a refrigerator. And the amount of light we needed, we were shooting at night out in the desert. You'd be driving, you'd be away from that and you turn around and it just looked like a nuclear explosion. That much light was what we needed. And this was a mere fraction of that.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that because there were moments in the film that I was watching that I was like, you know what, this kind of almost gives me like an old Hollywood vibe because it had like when the sunlight hit, you had really harsh, like almost like a crimson-y kind of background when you're getting the moonlight, and the sunlight was just so bright and you could see it on the shoulders and the neck. Yeah. And it was giving me kind of that old school Hollywood vibe. So it's interesting to hear how pinpointed those lights were.
You say that because here we are dealing with a lot of very advanced technology, and you'll see it in Titanic. Basically Titanic was a very old school. The style of the photography was really kind of a nod to what David Lean was doing in like things like Dr. Zhivago and other films, and there's a lot of Jim that you look at the things that he's doing with the spaceships and RDA has a certain nasty architecture to it. That's the human environment of the invaders. But there is a lot that harkens back to to something that's a little classic. About his style. Yeah.
You had mentioned something when you were talking about filming underwater that you had like a small lens unit and then a cord that went out to your camera. It sounds a lot like the Rialto. Was that basically like the beginnings of the Rialto?
No, actually, sorry to say. The Rialto, totally the same thing. The Rialto, I think, kind of hatched because of
it seems like that.
So when I first saw actually a mock-up, or was the Rialto, this was at Cinegear or something like that. They had a definite tie-in with Avatar in Sony's booth.
Yeah,
and then I think up on one wall you saw the Rialto, that definitely was part of that gestation was part of having an association with Jim, I think, as far as that goes. Unfortunately, when we did get into our underwater units, you're housing a 3D rig, and 3D rigs, even as small as you can get them, are still rather bulky. So we had these basic housings that were specifically made for the silhouette needs of our smaller camera systems. You wind up with something that's about 3 feet wide by almost 3 feet wide. And the issue with that was basically heat buildup, because all of our tanks, we had shallow tanks, we had deep tanks, they're built for humans to be in, which means that it's not ocean temperature water. It's, kind of lukewarm to bathtub warm. So you're not going to have your actors wanting to jump out of the tank every 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So there was a heat buildup with that, and we'd have to, every once in a while, we'd have to drag our cameras out and put them in an ice bath for 8 minutes or something before we could shoot. That's, but there's very little room to vent that heat when you're in a housing like that. Shooting, eventually it got around to, okay, we've had all this wonderful stuff that Jim did in his tank that is performance capture, that is a virtual world. Eventually we have to get back into the various tanks where we shot our live action stuff. And I'm very sad to say that was almost as frustrating as when we were shooting Titanic. It was like, somehow you put a camera in the water and you still need lights to light the thing. It still takes a long time to do that. I mean, yeah. part of the budget, the schedule in Titanic was, hey, we're moving 6 times slower than we would move if we could just set this light down and walk away from it. So, it's those things required patience. Our Spider was wearing a breathing mask when we were shooting, in our sets. Visual effects opted just to put the mask in virtually. Now he's wearing a real mask, and you get your actor down in the water, and in the reflections you can instantly see how the movie was made, because everybody's everybody's out there. You
don't need a behind the scenes film. Just show the version without the visual effects on the screen.
Yeah. No, it was like, okay, this isn't going to work. So we tested this mask. Jim and Dan Cox, our visual effects supervisor, they kind of put the mask, it basically copied it into a computer and experimented with different versions of it. And we came up with a version that looked pretty much like it was supposed to be, but at least was filmable,
yep.
And that also just became a thing. But even though it was a better mask, there were just all these reflections that we're just trying to keep out of the movie.
We have a couple questions specifically about the 48 frames per second versus 24. Capture Video Productions and Fabrizio Diaz, both on Instagram, wants to know the reason for shooting 24, the reason for shooting 48, and also the reason why you kind of, what appears at least to be kind of like a 24 version of the 48 for some of the more dramatic scenes.
And the post was done in New Zealand. In the middle of filming, Jim said, "I'm just moving to New Zealand." He sold his houses. The family came over, and there he was. It's like, I'm not moving out of this country. And so all the post was done there. So I was not privy to every decision. But when we were starting in terms of our tests, what we were thinking is, there were a couple reasons for shooting 48. Is that when you start with 48, you have twice as much information as, say, shooting at 24 for Weta to have. And it really helps them to have all this information. And then he said, "Oh, okay, there's the original part of the original thinking is not every part of the world is going to see this film at 48 frames. Not every part of the world is going to have, a Dolby IMAX theater to see this. So we had IMAX versions at 48 that were basically kind of a glorified 1.185 aperture. And then knowing that we'd also have a 239 version to show in theaters. And then Jim said, okay, we shoot at 48. Which is, of course, it's twice 24. So then they'll make a sample of the movie that becomes 24.
Yeah.
Now, and this is, to me, it's really interesting because the 48, I felt immersed in the film. And yet I do hear people say, oh, what's this motion smoothing going on? The motion smoothing was just no technique. It was just the offshoot of shooting at 48. And I don't know, kind of as an end user, and I try to put myself as, here I am, a person sitting in the audience enjoying this movie. There wasn't, that shift didn't take me out of the movie. He also, he could do things for action scenes with a 48 frame base, in terms of little tweaks he had to make in case there was any judder or, some artifacts. He could deal with that better at 48. But, he did, and especially just with close-ups where kind of people are sitting around, he went back to 24 because he felt like the 48 was just a little too, I don't know, worked much better for the virtual than it did for some of the human scenes.
And it's risky because, The Hobbit got really bad critiques for, I don't think that was 48 though. Was that 72? I don't remember.
It was either that or 60. And my experience, because it's seared in my mind, of going to see Hobbit, back then was, this is almost, this is really hard to watch because I just feel like I'm in a plate, looking through a plate glass window.
Yeah. Were you concerned about shooting 40? Obviously you tested it, but when you were first told that was the plan, were you kind of like, oh, how are we going to do this? Did it frighten you?
No, it wasn't that. We did, the additional thing we did with the 48 is we tested a bunch of shutter angles. Because we said, if we shoot at 48 and we just go with the traditional 180 degree shutter angle, it's going to be closer to The Hobbit, and we don't want that. Yep. So we started to give ourselves, we tested a bunch of different shutter angles and shooting slow moving scenes and shooting a person moving very fast. And we thought, kind of as a base, we found that very pleasing. And it felt like, okay, there's nothing here that's going to take, in our minds, take a viewer out of the movie.
What did you choose for shutter angle? Actually, I think somebody Toivo Tavanian on YouTube asked about it as well.
Oh yeah, it was like, it's weird. You put 10 people watching our test, and you might have come up with 10 different shutter angles. But basically, in the ones that counted, we basically agreed, and we wound up with 275 degrees shutter angle as our base. So that almost took us back to what you'd see if you were shooting at 24 frames per second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a cinematographer, a director of photography's role in a film like Avatar, where it's so largely visual effects. We had, what was his name? Oh, Caleb Deschanel on for The Lion King.
Oh my God. He's amazing.
He was talking about The Lion King, and there's obviously there's differences. The Lion King was completely in 100% virtual, no live action at all.
Yeah.
You're in a different situation because you have real humans in the scene. You also have this incredible virtual world. And it seems like your role goes, you need a lot of prep, but it also seems like you're quite involved in the post-production and the lighting of the environments in and of themselves.
In a way, it's interesting. In a way, some of what we did live action was kind of a post-production because, first of all, it's the same and it's very different. The same meaning you're trying to create some kind of texture and mood with the lighting, an ambience that's conducive to the story, and also, Jim and I would talk about I said, okay, I'm doing this. Anything I need to know about this? And like there was a scene of Kiri and Sully. They're kind of on this floating dock, and down below in the water, you see a I mean, it's just this beautiful bioluminescent kind of aquarium of all these fish down there, almost tickling their feet. And I said, well, anything I need to know about it? He said, just play with the bioluminescence and just play with that. And of course, that's the first clue as a director of photography. Said, okay, this light that's going to light them is coming out of the water. And then I thought, well, let's play with, what we call caustics, and let's play with these ripples on these virtual characters' faces. And so we played with it, and we said, we think we have something here. This is pretty good. And then of course, there's all kinds of parts of the scene that aren't that motif that you light and stuff like that. But there was always a discussion, and then so what happens is that in one way, I'm lighting, but as he's doing his cameras, if he's doing his cameras of that scene, not often he was doing something else, I would start to see changes in what he was doing because of this flow of action. And then the next day I went to work with the lighting, I'd see, hey, wait a minute, all those baskets in this marui, they weren't there yesterday. You just saw, it's very, very plastic. Everybody's working on the same thing, molding it from their department. And then when he's doing cameras, he starts to see what I'm doing with my lighting. And, of course, so that's how kind of that went. But then I'm also building, while I'm doing this, of course, I have to think like I'm in pre-production, and I'm seeing, okay, wow, this is going to be a problem when we get to live action. And the creativity starts, there's creativity about the lighting, but then the creativity starts to arc toward, okay, what's the creative way to do this thing that I'm seeing? How do we do this? And then we get helped because all this information is flowing around our little ecosystem of information. We start to get tech viz done that exactly tells us Jim's camera started here and it got this far. And, the way his system is set up, he might move 5 feet on the volume, but he might ratio it to 10 feet per every foot he goes. So now you have this massive, maybe camera crane move of 50 feet. And now you have to start thinking, look at what he did. Basically, how do we do that? We know we'll never do this on a camera crane. Maybe we use a camera car, that kind of thing, because these stages were really big.
Yeah.
And so now you have your team and you're starting to, I go from a more creative mode into the worry and angst mode, and which pretty much plays for the end of the movie. Till the end of the movie was, okay, are we making the right decisions, and how we are going to, cap this amazingly visual movie, how we're going to kind of cap it with our live photography. And of course, we had a lot of live in both movie 2 and 3 sets where there were mainly humans, and every once in a while you had a Navi in a human environment. And then things would start to shift to the point, now you have humans in Navi or Metcalina environments. And by the end of it, once pretty much everybody had gone, now we were stuck with a growing spider. Somebody, when I first saw him, was like this cute little teenager or young boy, like 13 years old or something. And by the time we get to photography, he's totally different. And you're just praying that he doesn't look, he doesn't have kids who are graduating from high school by the time you're done, that thing. And so,
well, isn't that largely one of the reasons that you're doing 2 and 3 at the same time?
Absolutely. And also COVID didn't help because we had one block of filming. We said, we're going to break for Christmas and come back maybe in February. But when February happened, we were starting to get, the beginnings of the pandemic. And a few weeks later, we had a situation where New Zealand, and rightly so, did not want to let filmmakers back into the country because, after a lot of bargaining, with Jim and John Landau, and, and they both worked in New Zealand before. They both had people that they could talk to. kind of a deal was struck that if we had just super tied up COVID protocols, that we could come back to the country. We had to test, a bunch before we left. Everybody wore masks and shields on the plane. It seems ridiculous, but it was what it took.
Yeah.
And the plane was a charter plane. We get off the plane. We're loaded into buses. It's like a Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah.
Hey, look at all the dead sheep on the side of the road. No, it wasn't that bad. But then we go right to the hotel, and here's your home for the next 10 days. You're not going out of the room. You understand? And so there we were. But when we did finish that, we walked out into a society that was virtually COVID free, which was not the case in the United States.
Yeah.
However, we had these massively tight COVID protocols when we were shooting. We didn't want to get kicked out, of course, and we didn't want to screw it up for other international productions that wanted to come back. And so that turned out really well. But it slowed us down so much. The pressure was really on to shoot Jack Champion, who plays Spider, out as quickly as we could. And by that time, when it was really a spider-centric world, just my angst daily was, one job, and that is to embed this character in these jungles, on these beaches, in these sanctuaries, or whatever, all the different things. And it has to be seamless, because I believe that just people inherently know when something's a little bit off. If you shoot a daylight scene, everybody knows what sunlight feels like.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you have a little bit of leeway because you're creating a world, but still, it can't be too far out.
Well, there is that. And whatever Jim did, whatever I did, it did, all that information stayed with the production. So I could look at something I did, basically a year and a half ago and go, okay, that was the color of the light. This is it's coming from this direction. And of course, that's part of the problem, is just creating a light that just coherently seems right for what's happening in the virtual world.
I want to make sure I understand the way, just kind of an overview, top level idea of how production worked on Avatar, Way of Water, because I'm thinking all right, did it start with visual effects? Did you create your worlds first and then do the motion capture and incorporate it into it? What were the steps?
I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. This is kind of like a layer cake, but you start with one layer, and then halfway through that layer, you're already starting to build the second layer. Okay, first thing starts with the script. Basically, the only visual thing that's happening at that time is that production designers are hired, and they start pumping out, one production designer for the world of Pandora, the other for RDA. They are starting to pump out visual scenarios, that concept art that Jim approves. The writers are looking at this. They kind of write a lot of their script to this, and then also environments are created by what the writers wrote. And so, okay, already things are starting to get mixed up a little bit. But then, so you have that. Then you have your scripts, and now you have to create an environment, a world for all of this. That takes a while, to do all that virtual work. So that could be a year plus or a year and a half down the road. Now Jim comes in with his virtual camera, which is basically it's an iPad that is so souped up in terms of what it can do, and then also Jim has all these people at computers sitting behind him when he's working this way, and he actually has to scout the environments. Say, is this ample enough and correct enough for me to be shooting this? And he may sign off on that environment, but that environment, that layer, could still be worked on up until the day we leave for New Zealand. So, and then the next process is, okay, he's going to block his scenes. He starts to work with his troupe, this really gifted group of people, and they could stand in for any actor or anything. And he blocks his scenes, and he does an initial blocking of that scene. That happens on his virtual camera, but that's only the wide angle camera. What he's also got in his quiver is he's got what eventually, started out as like 4 other cameras, eventually turned into an army of 16 camera operators and their cameras. And they got really good at this. They would play the zone system, and they would blanket the action with all these different angles. This character from this angle, this character from this angle. So basically, even though they're reference cameras, because it's all captured into this motion capture or performance capture system, that scene is there for Jim to cut. So he goes and he cuts the scene, and he cuts enough scenes so he can get started with the actors. And now the actors come in, and they know now it's been blocked out. They don't really have to do any blocking. They know exactly where they're supposed to go. And they do a performance where all the cameras, they're still reference cameras, but they're very far away, and the only camera on the set, no equipment, no real lighting. They can do their performances. Mm. And now, so this portion of the capture is very performance centered. Now that goes back to the editors, and Jim, he had a process where he was editing these scenes with he had 3. There were 3 other editors, and they were busy editing these scenes. And now by this time, I've come in and I'm starting to light some scenes and also starting to do my prep. And so he basically up until the day we shot, it seemed like, and then we even had a small motion capture stage in New Zealand. Even when we were shooting, at the end of the day, he'd go back and work on his cameras, work on his visualization, the final visualization of how he was going to shoot the other scenes. So you have many, many different layers. It seems like a crazy ass way to make a film, but I think it was just complex enough for Jim. And I think part of the thing is he just loves to challenge himself. He's an explorer, and he just wants to explore and go there. And I've mentioned this before, but I've heard him say more than once. He says, we don't really know how to make this picture, but when we're done, we will. And he's assuming, in his provocateur mode, he's going to throw enough challenges out, and they're going to be met by members of his team. And he, that's his bet. And he's usually pretty good about his betting. I hope I didn't leave anything out. Okay. So here we get to live action, and I'm just basically, here's what I got to do. I have this one fabulous tool that helps me with my lighting.
What is it?
Because we had this thing called Simulcam, which basically Jim worked with when he was capturing. It basically, because Jim's laptop or whatever has these crazy looking antenna on it. So all the performance captures, they know exactly where he is. They know exactly what he's doing. The computer knows exactly where he's tipped up, down, he's moving, he's panned this way. The computer knows exactly what he's doing. So now it just shows him what in that virtual world he's looking at. So he's got that. Now,
so he's able to monitor the virtual world as he's moving the camera. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's totally, so he can see the environment, he can see all his virtual, and he has the power, and for somebody like Jim, who is, the control freak, I mean, he can change anything. He can say, which I thought he wanted to do with his live action films was, hey, move the sun over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that can be done. Now, all that information's in the information ecosystem. We get to we get to New Zealand, and especially when I'm shooting the spider stuff, I have this information, but they have this crazy good compositing system, which they were developing up until the last minute. The program's called Simulcam, but what they did is they also fitted a depth sensing program onto it that used part of it was where the camera was focused, but then it had depth monitors that were attached to the camera. And so that system knows exactly let's say where Spider is, and say he's deep in a swamp, or he's out walking through the forest with his Na'vi family. It knows where he is. It knows where everybody else in the frame is. And it does an amazing composite where it takes everything. All it does is it basically embeds the actor in the scene without, some of the things you had to do, like you were doing composites and you're doing, this is a 50-50 composite, or this is that way you can kind of tell what's going on. Well, this thing embeds the actor in the scene. So that was an amazing tool in order to see if the lighting was working. I mean, it's no longer, you do the math, you do everything you're supposed to, and then you look at it and you go, okay, this is working, or, oh, we better nudge this light, 3 feet this way, So that was for me, that was the tool to end all tools. That was great.
Well, we're down to just our last couple of minutes, and I wanted to wrap up our conversation with a little bit of advice to filmmakers, and specifically this one question that we got on Instagram from Fan of Fincher. And I love this question. It is, how important is it for a DP to keep up with technology? And the reason that I love this question is because I think it's so easy to just say, I'm just going to stick to the fundamentals. That's it. I don't need to worry about new technology. It's not about that. It's just about keeping true to my roots as a photographer, as a cinematographer. It's going back to the fundamentals of film. But then you, with these incredible opportunities throughout your career, Titanic, you certainly Avatar, Way of Water, all the films in between and before and after, you must have a different relationship with filmmaking technology. And I think your opinion on this would be great.
Yeah, that's a double-edged sword, because I think at root, I'm not really technology-oriented person, and you can ask my wife about that. And in fact, yesterday she said, "You shot this movie? I can't believe it." You
don't know how to use your cell phone, and you're filming an Avatar movie.
That's basically what was happening actually at the time. And I think you should keep up on technology. Maybe not. You don't have to go deep. You have to know what tools are available, and then. I'm lucky enough to have people around me now who can come to me and say, "Oh, you really need to know about this thing," and whether it's usually it's camera oriented or light oriented. Len, my chief lighting technician, is always showing me new tools. It's really great. And then another thing that happens is that, as I start to get into pre-production, I start to kind of drill down into the script or what's happening. I go, oh, I've got to find out specifically what this technology is about. I can't be the dunce in the room about this. But I do think you need it in some form. It doesn't have to be all the way down to the very marrow of the technology, but you have to know what's out there and what people can do. I don't even know if I'm ever going to shoot something with a virtual LED panel thing, but I'm certainly finding out about it and going to people who know what they're doing about it. So I guess that's my answer.
Well, it's a great one. And the film is it's just ridiculous. Like, how do you can't compare it to anything else except for the original Avatar. There's really nothing else you can compare it to. And I think, myself and so many fans of the series and the franchise have been waiting a long time for this, and you and your team delivered beyond our wildest expectations. So congratulations on just such an incredible film.
Thank you. I'm having a fun time getting to talk about it again. It's great. Thank you for that opportunity.
All right, I want to thank Russell Carpenter ASC, the director of photography for Avatar: The Way of Water, for coming on the show and sharing his experiences and knowledge with all of you guys. And of course, I want to thank you as well for supporting the show and asking your questions. I love the audience questions. You guys are smart. You're in the industry. You're working. You have great questions, oftentimes better questions than I do. So I kind of incorporate your questions into mine, but I always want to give you credit. So those of you that did ask, I do appreciate it. And for those of you who I didn't get to ask your question, it is what it is. We ran out of time, but please do continue to submit your questions because I love it and I will always do my best to get them on the show. Of course, I want to thank Connor Crosby, who produces this show. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. If you want to follow me, you can. I'm on Instagram at Ben Consoli, BenConsoli. But of course, all things Go Creative Show are at gocreativeshow.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where you can not only hear the show, but see the show. So thank you guys for supporting us, and we will see you next time on the next episode of Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.